Alright, here's the second PowerPoint video for a little background information that I said I'd provide you. So on medieval Japan from about the late 1100s all the way through to the 1600s, or 1600. We've got the medieval era of Japan. This one's going to be split up into about 3 time periods. Not really going to talk too much about the time periods, but there are some things of note during this era of Japan. We've got this huge acceptance of this idea of Bushido, these code of conduct ideas, how to behave, kind of an extension on Confucianism that you saw was brought in the previous time period. We get the Mongolian invasions. At around this time in China, the Mongols have conquered all of China, first under Genghis Khan, and then later his grandson Kublai Khan is able to conquer all of China. They set their sights on Japan. So they decide to get this big army together, Mongolians, Chinese, Koreans, you name it, put them on boats, send them towards Japan. Unfortunately, didn't have Doppler radar back then, and massive typhoon comes, destroys a lot of the ships. The remaining ships go back and decide, we're just gonna regroup. Several years later, they try again. Bunch of soldiers together on boats, go towards Japan. Again, bad weather comes up, sinks a lot of the boats, and the armies turn around and go back home. So we've got 2 invasion attempts that happen, but don't really happen. We get this idea in Japan at this time period that the gods or the spirits or whatever loves Japan, will protect Japan from outside invasion. We get this idea that the emperor, whoever it is, will let no harm happen in Japan. That might be an idea a lot of the people have, but that's not really an idea that the shogun, the daimyos, or the emperor himself have. They spend a lot of money on building walls and defensive projects, increasing the army size, all in case of a third invasion, which never happens. But now you've got all these soldiers lying around, all these weapons lying around. We get some military leaders who come with the idea of, hey, let's go invade Korea. So many years after the failed invasions by the Mongols, we get Japan invading Korea. We get the start of some new types of art from Japan, like the kabuki. But the big thing that this time period's known for, this is what people think of when they think of ancient Japan. This idea of, you've got an emperor, you've got a shogun, you've got daimyos, you've got samurai, ronin, peasants. This is the time period people think of. The emperor at this time was basically just a figurehead. He had no real power. A lot of the people would worship the emperor. A lot of people, these peasants had this idea that the emperor was running the country or ruling things, but it really wasn't the emperor. It was the shogun. And under the shogun were the daimyos. Shogun was in charge of the daimyos. Daimyos each had their own area that they were in charge of. Their areas were subdivided and run by the samurai. Very much like feudal Japan, where you had the king, and then below the king you had your nobles who kind of ran different areas, and they had their knights who ran different areas. It's very, very, very similar to that. About 90% of Japan at this time were peasants. Their jobs mostly farming and fishing. But if the samurai went to war, they might take a bunch of peasants with them. We get the very bottom of the class system, your skilled workers, your artisan, your craftspeople. All these people are at the lowest levels of society. And it's not because their stuff wasn't valued. Their stuff was bought, their stuff was, art was still popular, things like that. Someone had to make the samurai's armor, and good armor, a good sword. They were worth a fortune. So you get a lot of really rich people at the bottom of society. And then you got your samurai near the top of the society, who eventually will become quite poor. And that's going to create a very interesting dynamic later on at the end of the period, where the money is owned by people at the bottom who want to move up. People at the top don't have money, but they can borrow it from the people at the bottom. And we get this really weird kind of a shift happening later on. But if you're curious why this is, it goes back to kind of Confucian ideas of your goal in life should be your relationships, should be your duties, not profit. Alright, speaking of samurai, this is what comes to mind when people think of this era. Their armor, just beautiful, amazing layered armor. And you can see it here. With Europeans, the armor was one solid piece. It really made it hard to move around. If you got stabbed, the armor might not protect you because it's one solid piece. Whereas this armor is layered. It's going to give you more flexibility and a little bit more protection. Some things to think about is they didn't always fight like you see in the movies. Two guys with swords will just start running towards each other. That's not usually how it happened. The samurai were big into strategy. One of the ways that they would fight, whenever possible, was to make the other guy come to them. You make the other guy fight on your terms, where you want, when you want. You dictate as much as you can of the battle. Increases your chances of victory. Also allows you to utilize one of the great weapons that the samurai really loved, bow and arrow. They could shoot from horses, although some of your accuracy goes down with that. You tend to use shorter bows on horses. Samurai had these really, really long bows. We're talking at least as big as a person, which were great for shooting these very powerful long-range arrows. So, like I said, we think of these weapons like the katana. This idea that the samurai all carried these swords, that's all they fought with. That's not really true. You had lots of weapons. Let's say you wanted to crush someone's armor. Here we've got an example of what you would use. It's basically just like a baseball bat with spikes on it. Although a lot heavier, you can really, really smash through the armor. No matter how good the armor is on your head, your helmet, it's a good chance you take one of these to the head, you're dead. I mean, it's... We get another very common, stereotypical weapon from Japan, right here. In case you're wondering, I have the names to the left here. We get what looks like a katana, but much, much longer. If you look in the upper right-hand corner here, you'll see much, much longer. Definitely a two-handed weapon, not super practical on the battlefield. We get our much shorter daggers. We get our spears. And then here you can see the yumi, or the really long bows. So the samurai would have a lot of different looks. There's different types of armor. You can see different looks. You've got different types of weapons. And that's not even counting guns, which come in later. If you want to know more about this time period of Japan and kind of into the next time period, when the U.S. forced the Japanese to open their borders, an awesome, awesome video that I've used in my classes, I've really enjoyed, my kids enjoy, is done by PBS. You can find it on YouTube or pbs.org. It's a 3-part video. I don't think I've used all 3 parts, but I've used pieces from each part. The first part is called The Way of the Samurai. The second part is called The Will of the Shogun. And the third part is The Return of the Barbarians. It's a really interesting look at how the shoguns came into power. You get a nice look at this kind of civil war and the constant fighting, how much power the shoguns really had. And then you get to see Christians in Japan before the Americans come in. You get to see the effects of the Americans coming in, and the admiral who says, "Open your borders," or else. So, highly recommend it if you want to get some background information, or even just to show clips of it in your class. And that's it.